You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
Chablis Dandridge.
an inmate at a federal prison. Hang up to decline the call or to accept, dial 5 now. If you wish to
Yes, there are some promising things on the horizon insofar as prison reform is concerned, and I just wanted to encourage anybody who cares about this issue, who cares about the community and the people who are dealing with the criminal justice establishment to support the efforts and support the movement for common sense prison reform. We have come collectively as a nation to the realization that the 3 decades of failed prison policies that we have endured are not working, and I believe it's most readily seeable by small shows like Eric Holder, who recently said that he would give a directive to his district attorneys to eliminate drug amounts so that they can skirt around harsh mandatory minimum sentences, and more recently President Obama, when he commuted the sentence of 8 individuals, some of which who were serving life sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, that if they had have been sentenced today would have never received the life sentence. And the reason why the community has to support and why it's so incumbent upon us as a society and a nation to get behind these changes is because everybody is affected by the prison system and the prison industrial complex, even though it's a little known factor. It's one of those things that oftentimes lives in the shadows, and it's the big purple elephant in the room that nobody wants to speak about. But the reality is that in fiscal year 2012, the Federal Bureau of Prisons expenditures exceeded $8 billion, and that's $8 billion of taxpayers' money. And focusing just on the federal prison population, because the federal prison population is the largest in the whole nation, with about 219,000 at last check, followed only by Texas, California, Florida, and then New York. The federal prison system has had 30 years of policies out of the Reagan administration and the war on drugs that have not served us very well. The federal prison system houses 3,278 people, all serving life sentences. That means that they will be incarcerated until they're deceased. Per a recent ACLU report, out of that 3,278 people, 2,389 of them are nonviolent drug offenses. Another 655 of them are nonviolent property crimes. And offenses that were inclusive of violence range at 234 individuals. So the majority, the lion's share of these people who will stay in prison until they're deceased were for nonviolent offenses. And if you think about the fact that it costs on average $30,000 a year to house somebody in prison, if you put somebody in prison at 21 years old and keep them there until they die, which is reasonable that they could live to be 60 or 80 years old, that's a lot of wasted money that could probably be used a whole lot better. One of the more shocking factors is that as a nation, America is home to about 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. We have an estimated prison population totaling somewhere around the number of 2.2 million people between federal, state, city, and county jails. And that is a great waste of money if you think about all of the other things that we could do. Now, the handwriting is on the wall that this is unsustainable, and because of that, Congress has done things in the last years to look towards changing that, but it takes the community to be involved and to rally behind these efforts and to care enough to say that we would like to see something different, because what people don't get to see is the other side of this equation is when you take an individual and you give them, which the average drug sentence in the federal system is about 10 years. When you give them 10 years worth of time, but because of housing them, you have to cut back on your availability for rehabilitation and programs and vocational and educational training that will help them be more successful when they leave this situation, you create a recipe for disaster and failure every time. The most recent things that have come to the public attention is that the United States Sentencing Commission is considering amending the sentencing guideline with an all drugs -2 this year, and they're seeking public comments. What all drugs -2 is it will take anybody who has committed a drug offense down 2 levels on their guideline-based offense level, and what that will do is effectively reduce the sentence by an average of 11 months for nonviolent drug offenders. And if you take the fact that over half of the federal prison system are consist of nonviolent drug offenders, then you say that you will reduce the prison population by half on average of 11 months, which is a savings of hundreds of millions of dollars. So on March 13th, the Sentencing Commission is asking for the public to comment on how they feel about that. What I'm imploring people to do who care about this issue is to get involved, to get in touch with the Sentencing Commission, and I'm sure you can find them on the web at ussc.gov and find out how you can let your voice be heard, because the community at this point is they are the ambassadors and the voice for the voiceless, because when you're incarcerated, a lot of your civil liberties and privileges have been compromised, and you effectively have been disenfranchised from the political system. And so we have to count on people like you and others in the community, leaders who are aware of the problem and who know if we don't see change that tragedy is imminent and inevitable. There are other bills that are in the Senate that people can support, 3 of which that I know off the top of my head are S619, the Safety Valve Act, S1410, the Smarter Sentencing Act, which, by the way, just passed the Senate Judiciary Committee 13-5 to be considered for a full vote by the Senate very recently, and also S1675, the Recidivism Reduction and Public Safety Act. All of these things are things that Congress is considering for changing and reform in the very near and immediate future, and it's going to take the community to support these efforts. And before I close, I would like to say that recently a report that was issued by the Congressional Research Service that was released January of 2003, the Congressional Appropriations Committee have already expressed concerns that continued growth of the federal prison population is not sustainable. And quoting the report, it said, unless there's a change in the upward trajectory of the number of inmates in the federal prison system, Congress will face a decision regarding appropriation of additional funds for the Bureau of Prisons. Assuming that growth in the budgetary requirements for the Bureau of Prisons exceeds the growth in the allocations for the Administration of Justice budget function under annual budget resolutions, policymakers might face the choice to reduce appropriations for the Department of Justice agencies or Department of Justice grant programs in order to fund the federal prison system. And really, in summation, what that means is if the federal prison keeps going at the rate that it's going and we don't do an about face, that agencies under the Department of Justice, like the FBI, the ATF, the court systems, prosecutors, and judges, will either have to experience cutbacks, and the Department of Justice grants for programs that are geared towards intervention, rehabilitation, education, and vocational training, all of which will help to stem recidivism, will have to suffer. And if those things suffer, that means the whole community suffers. So again, what I'd like to do is just to encourage anybody who cares about this issue, anybody who has a loved one who's affected by this issue, to understand that it's a community thing, and that in the end we're all affected by it, not only financially, but at the loss of the potential of life, where people could otherwise be doing greater things than sitting around wasting a lot of time in prison for long, draconian sentences for things that otherwise should have been punished for a very short amount of time. And there are organizations, if you're not familiar with, I'm sure the work, if you're at this, listening to this, you're familiar with the work of Incarcerated Voices, who are doing a tremendous job out there bringing awareness and giving a voice to the incarcerated. But there's also other organizations like FAM.org. You can check them out. That's Families Against Mandatory Minimums at FAMM.org, and Prisology.org. That's PRISOLOGY.org. Again, that's PRISOLOGY.org. And again, keep on coming back to the Incarcerated Voices website and just stay in touch, because an aware public and a concerned public is an active public. And I'd like to thank you all for your time, and thank Incarcerated Voices for all of the work that they're doing, trying to make reform and head in the right direction. Thank you.